Okay, we're back on. You had alluded to it before, but in 1975, you became part of the inaugural team for Good Morning America.
Yes, I did.
How did that come about?
It was, it happened shortly after my first special on CBS aired and did very, very well. Fred Silverman was the head of programming at CBS. And he said to me, if you're going to leave Metromedia or anything like that, he said, I don't want you to take another job. He said, because I'm going to put a new show on CBS in the morning, and I would like for you to be my arts and entertainment editor. All I know is that there were a lot of rumors going around at that time that something else was happening, and I was very surprised. Fred Silverman was named the head of programming for the American Broadcasting Company, and he left CBS. And I had a couple of friends who were very close to him, and he said, what are you going to do? Are you going to start this new show or whatever? And he said, yes. And he said, are you going to use Rona Barrett? And he said, yes, tell her just to sit still for a little while longer, and I'll be back. And sure enough, I got a phone call from, I don't remember if it was my lawyer or someone else, a producer, and said, Fred wants you to become his arts and entertainment editor on a new show called Good Morning America. And then they called me in, and then they were talking about who they could get for the lead, what they called the people who were going to spin the wheel. All they were supposed to do was to do the lead-ins to the new people, and it was going to be all the things that I had talked about what do people want to listen to or read when they had a newspaper. There would be a sports section. There would be an investigative journalism. There'd be a column about Washington. There'd be Rona and entertainment, and there'd be the hard news and interviews then in between. And that was the basic premise of this new show, which he was going to put on CBS. And so he said, "Do you have any ideas for the lead?" For the anchor of the show and a female anchor of the show. And I said, well, who are you thinking about? And one of the names they mentioned was David Hartman. And I had just done, I don't know, some kind of talk show or some kind of show with David Hartman. And I thought he was very smart and very sharp. And I said, he might really turn out to be a better communicator that way than he maybe even as an actor. And I said, you should try him. I mean, at least go and talk to him about him. And sure enough, it was David that they finally took. They were thinking about Richard Dawson, the late Richard Dawson. They were thinking about several other people. But Fred, I think, really wanted an actor who had a different kind of an appeal, and David turned out to be that person. And so he was hired, and Nancy Dussault was hired. And Nancy was, of course, a Broadway actress and singer and charming. And poor Nancy, I always felt she got, short-shrifted. They never found the time to groom her into the role that they really wanted. They just almost left her out there, and she was kind of lost. I don't think she'd ever really done an interview before, and this was not her world, but she was a sweet, darling girl and somebody you'd like to wake up with in the morning or something like that. But her career didn't last as long as I think she would have liked it to. And I was always saying to the producer, I said, you got to teach her what she has to do. She's got to learn. And I said, nobody's teaching her. And anyway, they didn't really give her the shot that she should have had. But Nancy and I have still remained, kind of chums and friends. So whenever I see her, like old home week. So Nancy was hired, and then right after Nancy, they brought in Sandy Hill, who was a local CBS girl. I believe it was CBS. Sandy was on KCBS, and Sandy was really terrific. And then some people, I guess, didn't find Sandy warm enough for them in the morning. Who knows? How do you measure warmth? How do you measure anything like that? But, nobody ever wants to take blame. So they're looking for the next guy to blame. So it was research whose fault that was, and it was so-and-so's fault though that was. And you asked me a question about how did you find out about the business and what it was really all about? By watching things like this happen. And another great story, Bob Wood, who was a terrific head of CBS president, when he was alive, I said, how do you make a decision whether you keep a show on the air or you take it off the air if the ratings are just so-so, sitting right there in the middle? They're not a top 10, and they're not in below 30 and 40. And he said, a lot really depends on how much we really like the person, and really what the ratings chances are that maybe if we put it at a different time slot, it could go a little bit higher and do a little bit better. And I asked him at the time, how did he make the decision about whether to keep Jim Nabors on the air or take him off the air during the whole Rock Hudson situation, not when he got AIDS, but when there were invitations that were being sent out from different parts of the country inviting you to Rock's wedding, and the person he was marrying was always another man, and it was a different man all the time. So I did an investigative piece on that story and found out about a group of people in California who decided to play tricks that turned into a terrible, horrible ordeal. And of course, at one point, Jim Nabors was one of the people that was named as going to marry Rock, and it made headlines in all the newspapers. The Wire stories, the Wires carried all these kinds of stories, and so they landed up in every kind of newspaper, little hamlets and big cities, and it wasn't a very glorious time at all. And I thought that maybe Jim Nabors had got caught up in that because of that negative publicity, that CBS may have canceled him for that reason. And Bob Wood, of course, said, no, that was not the real reason at all. It was just that the show had run its course, and it was time for it really to go, and it was unfortunate that it happened during this particular situation, but it had nothing to do with him allegedly being accused of possibly being a gay man.
And this was Gomer Pyle? Was that the show?
No, it was his.
Jim Nabors show.
The Jim Nabors, his variety kind of show. Yes.
Now, what did Good Morning America do for your career? Anything change?
More and more people got to see me, and the stories I began running were a lot of stories also about who runs the business that we all talk about, And why was it important to know about these people? And my feeling was, these were the people who made the decisions, what you and I got to see. Who were they? How did they get to make these decisions? Why did they make these decisions? As I just gave you the example of a Bob Wood telling me about how they sometimes choose somebody who's sitting in the middle there and decide, well, if we really like them, we'll give them another shot, and if we don't really like them, goodbye. I realized that there were three things in life that people have always been interested in and remain today: power, sex, and money. Not necessarily in that order, but those are the three big things. They lead to war, they lead to divorces, they lead to marriage, and they lead to greed. And I felt that the entertainment industry really fell right there with all of them. This was an industry that captured all three elements of what people were really interested in. And I began breaking big stories about big executives leaving studios, going to networks, vice versa, and major stories, the David Begelman scandal, which was really one of the first big blue-collar scandals that Hollywood had seen in a lot of years. And I would say stories like that gave my reputation a different twist and a different turn. And I also began reviewing films. And in reviewing films, that also gave me, I think, a big leg up on who I could get to interview and people of that nature. And so there's no denying that Good Morning America was totally responsible in the end of bringing it all under one roof and people really getting to see just not 2 minutes of this and 3 minutes of that. It was, for a show that was on 2 hours every day, 5 days a week, I contributed at least 2 hours, 2.5 hours of programming to that show. I did a minimum of 2-3 interviews a week and 2 news segments every day. And that was tough because I was on the West Coast. Many times when I had a really big story, like when the David Begelman scandal really broke, I was awakened and I awoke everybody else up, and I had just broadcast like at midnight for the 4 o'clock when they went on the air, which was 4 o'clock our time, but 7 o'clock their time. And I said, I have to go on live because the program that I'm doing for tomorrow morning is, I got a better lead, and it should go on the air because everybody was waiting for these stories. And so KABC was really terrific. They would call in the 11 o'clock news crew, and they would come back to the studio, and they turn on the lights, and they turn on the cameras, and I would feed the story, again, sometimes live at 4 o'clock in the morning. Wow. And the toughest part was that I had my news segments were approximately 2 minutes long, that were increased to 2.5 minutes long, to increase to 3 minutes long. I don't think people realize how many stories or how long 3 minutes really is on the air. If I went 2 minutes and 31 seconds, I either had to re-record my segment over again because it had to be 2:30 or nothing else, because at 2:31 maybe up came a commercial. Well, that sort of thing drove me absolutely nuts, and it also was very exhausting. And I would read my script over and over and had a stopwatch, and we would carefully time it, and we would cut out words, and we would have to rewrite a sentence just so we could get it within the framework. But it also gave me the style that people got used to, this rapid style of, today here's the news. So-and-so ba 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 ba, so forth and so on. And if I came in a little short, that was fine. But if I came in over, sometimes I had to do it as many as 3, 4, and 5 times, and that drove me crazy. And it also drove the techs crazy too. It wasn't easy. It really wasn't easy. I'd rather be on live any day of the year than to have to pre-record and be so precise. And so that was my life.
After 5 years with Good Morning America, you moved to the Today Show.
Yes. Well, in retrospect, it probably was a big mistake that I made. But I didn't think so at the time. And I must tell you that NBC treated me in the beginning with such great respect. The Today Show was run by the news division, and but not everyone was thrilled that I was on the Today Show. Most of all, Tom Brokaw. He refused to introduce my segments on the Today Show. So it was left up to Jane Pauley to do it. And for some reason, Tom and I just never got along. He never liked what I did. His lawyer was my lawyer at one point, but once he had Tom Brokaw and Tom Snyder and a bunch of other news people, he became a very, very powerful attorney. And but anyway, I did a very good job for the Today Show because they were failing in their ratings. And when I went on the Today Show, their ratings started to go up again. And I told them that they could probably wipe out Good Morning America because it needed a major overhaul at the time. I said, if you put me on in the same time spot as I was on Good Morning America, because people were so used to those time slots that that I thought it would have been a better way to go, but they didn't. And they also offered me, when I went to NBC, a whole series of programming that I didn't have the opportunity to do at ABC. I really didn't want to leave ABC, but as I said, they had treated me, Rona, what does Rona want now? What does Rona want now? And it was like, don't say it that way. One day I sat down and I wrote I think it was 5 pages long, about what I wanted in my contract. I said to my lawyer, are you going to present it? And he said, no, you present it. So I presented it to them, and I got a phone call from Tony Thermopoulos at the time, and he said, I don't think I've ever had an artist call me and tell me so specifically what it is that they wanted, including money and everything else. And he said, I don't think I could do all of this, Rona. I really don't. And I said, well, if that's the case, then I've got to think about where I go next and what I do next. You don't want to go anywhere. This is your home. Just stay put. And I remember I was having dinner with Sidney Poitier and his wife, Joanna. My lawyer was there, the dinner table. I believe the late Sue Mengers was there with her husband and my husband. And the phone started ringing. And it was Fred Pierce, the head of ABC at the time, calling my lawyers, trying to figure out how they could work out a deal that I wouldn't go to NBC. And my lawyer kept coming back to the dinner table, and of course they didn't know what was happening. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, there's just a little nonsense going on someplace." Anyway, I made up my mind that with Fred Silverman over at NBC now, I had a greater opportunity to make some different career decisions. And so I took their offer, which was fairly lucrative. And it didn't turn out to be what I thought it was going to be with Tom Snyder.
Tomorrow?
On the Tomorrow Show, Coast to Coast. From day one, it was almost a disaster. From my first interview was with Mary Tyler Moore, who had given me this interview right after her son had committed suicide. And it related back to ordinary people and the son in that movie and blah, blah, blah. And because of the son having died, and then this interview was airing, and I had snuck into New York City to do the interview with Mary, and Tom got upset because I was only supposed to be coming from Hollywood and not from New York City. It just started a whole big Megillah. And it turned into something that was really not nice, not good. And I just decided I had to end this. Had to end it. And I got a phone call one day while I was at the hairdresser early in the morning, and it was Mary Tyler Moore's then ex-husband, Grant Tinker, and he said, "Rona, we don't want you to leave the Today Show. What can I do to make you stay on the Today Show?" I said, "For one, give me the money that I'm really entitled to and not the money that you've been currently paying me." And he says, "Oh, I can't do that. I just can't do that." And I said, "Grant, if you can't do it, who can?" And he said, "Well, I'm really sorry." And I said, "I'm sorry too, because I think you're losing and making the wrong bet." And that was the beginning of the end, except that I had several more other things to do at NBC under my contract. And so one of them was to start a nighttime show or a daytime show. And I chose a nighttime show called Television Inside and Out, which did a lot of very interesting pieces that people still are doing kind of things today, like taking a look at the role of blacks in film. And I had some wonderful people working on that show, reporters also, and kind of liked it. I didn't like the sets so much, but I liked the show itself. And we had Rock Hudson on the first show right after his heart problems and how he almost thought he was going to die. And it was the beginning of an idea that could have really materialized into something about the television inside and out. A look at it both from the outside and the inside. And so it was scheduled for the worst time slot on NBC. And we did a fairly good rating even in the worst time slot. And they kept moving it around, and the show preceding us was allowed to run over, and so I never started at 10 o'clock at night at Saturday night, which had always been, I believe that was the time slot that was the death knell for NBC. They could never get a show to stay on the air that was on that time slot on Saturday nights at 10. So they kept moving me. I said, can't build an audience this way. Can't build an audience. So we stopped doing that show. And then I came up with another idea. I wanted to do a show, not like Rod Serling, but introduce stories that I had never told before in dramatic form. Stories that people didn't know, that nuggets of stories that would complete the story that was never told. And Fred Silverman thought it was a great idea, and we made a deal that I would write the novels, and I could publish the novels myself, on my own with the publisher, and the movies would come out, and the books would then come out like the day after. And
Were these like true stories, or?
Well, they were fiction, but they were based on fact. And so that was that. And 2 weeks before we were to go into production on the very first movie and book, NBC decided that the cost of doing that production was more than they wanted to spend, because they were doing it through their NBC Productions, their own in-house company, and they pulled the plug. And that was the end of that. And that's the time that I pretty much said to myself, you know what, Rona, things are changing all around. With the David Begelman scandal, taking you back to that period, it signaled to Wall Street that a blue-collar crime was something that could go on in Hollywood. And I found it rather interesting. There may be no correlation whatsoever, but I thought there was a correlation to it. And I said, one of these days, every studio, every network, everything is going to be owned by the big guys, the big corporations, because they can see where there's a lot of money to be made here. And who knows what else they were thinking. And I was right. And I said, if the big corporations get to run these companies, the chances of ever being controversial, saying the things you want to say, you probably would not have that opportunity. And I felt I probably would get slaughtered at some point if I came up with a story that wasn't to the liking of the major corporation, not necessarily to the networks or to the local station, but to the new corporate mama. And I said, I think it's time for me to get out of Dodge. And at the same time, I was having trouble in my marriage, and I wanted to save my marriage. And that meant a great deal to me, to save the marriage. Been married 11 years or so, 12 years, and thought that was a long time to suddenly throw it away. And I said to my husband, I said, do you want to save this marriage? He says, I most definitely do. And I said, then we got to leave here. And that's when I made the decision to move to the Santa Ynez Valley, California, to Central Coast, and never regretted a moment of it.
Did you ever pop back in, or do you still follow entertainment news?
The first thing I did was cancel my subscription to Variety, cancel my subscription to The Hollywood Reporter, cancel my subscription to the Weekly Variety, and cancel all other subscriptions that I had to all kinds of advertising, magazine, everything.
So like cold turkey?
Cold turkey.
Did you have trouble? Did you have any feelings that you did want to get back in, or were you good?
Every once in a blue moon, I would always think of what Walter Cronkite once said, asked that question, how do you feel that you're now not working? And he said, I feel great, but every once in a while there comes along a story, and I feel like I'm some firefighter. And I put on my yellow slick jacket and my hat, and I come down the pole, and I run out the front door, and I realize I have no fire engine. And that's exactly how I felt at various times, but not a lot.
Is there one story that you really, really felt that?
I felt one of the stories I would have liked to have covered for a lot of different reasons would have been the Michael Jackson story when he was accused the first time of maybe being a pedophile. I thought I had a lot of insight into who Michael really was through my magazines.
You were one of the first to cover him.
Yes, I was. I was one of the first people to ever cover him through our magazines. I think Tiger Beat and all the others, and I got to meet the family, and I got to know them a little bit, and there was stories like that, and every once in a while, I'd like to do more of an editorial kind of thing, to talk about the girls who have been in a lot of trouble of late, who always make headlines and keep going off to jail and coming back out. And, I believe there are very valid reasons, and sometimes we don't always get the right story. And other times I feel that I know the sources who I still could go to who would give me the right answers. And even after all these years, but it's not often.
Do you think there's anyone who's followed in your footsteps in what you do?
I think there are shows that have followed in my footsteps, but not a person.
Before we go to summing up, I did want to ask you about one appearance where you played yourself on Moonlighting.
Oh, I loved that.
The straight poop. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, well, it was by accident. I was at an event for Brandon Tartikoff, and the writer and producer of Moonlighting, we were outside standing waiting for our cars, and he said, "Rona Barrett," he said, "boy, I think I have an idea that I would just love to explore with you." And of course, it was the final episode of Moonlighting. And, and so I said, "Sure, I'll do it for you." And that's how I got to do it.
I'm not sure if it was the final one.
But
I think
maybe
it was one of the ones after that long hiatus.
Oh, maybe it was something like that. But wasn't it the final poop or whatever it was called? I don't know. I forgot now. But it was a wonderful experience. I love Bruce Willis. He was terrific, and everybody on the set was just wonderful to me.
Now, you interviewed
great.
all the characters in character.
In character.
Now, was it scripted?
Part of it, yes. A little bit was, but most of it was scripted. Yeah.
Did you enjoy playing yourself?
I didn't know I was really playing myself, but I guess I was.
How have you felt over the years about the parodies that have been done about you? I know Carol Burnett did it.
I owe everything to Carol, because Carol, when I was just locally, on just local television, she was the one who started with what was it, Grin and Barrett, or something like that, it was she used my name.
Rona Rumor.
Rona Rumor. She used my name on national television, and I'm saying to myself, nobody in the rest of the country knows who I am. I mean, my God, Carol Burnett. It was, that's basically how it all started. I mean, people began parroting me and doing things like that, and I guess that's the sincerest form of flattery of sorts.
What was the best part of your job?
Knowing that you came up with a very good story that no one else had, and all your information was correct, and seeing it then picked up all over the rest of the country or the world. And I guess it was also creating some new ideas. That was the best part, like doing those specials and getting those women and those men to talk to me about things that they never talked about before on television.
How did you do that? How did you convince them? What about you made them say, "Okay, I'm going to trust trust"?
I just said, guys, these are what people want to know. We're not living in the days of Clark Gable. I said it's a different time, and people are talking about this. You know, you have all of these talk shows that are on the air, and they're asking people about, you know, incest and sleeping with your father and sleeping with your mother and having affairs with your cousins and I mean it's unbelievable, and I think you owe it to your public, to at least people, to get to know who you really are.
How did something occur? The Cher interview, for example. I mean, you did it on her bed.
On her bed.
Yeah. I mean, how did
I
that...
asked her where she would like to do the interview, and she says, "Oh, let's do something different." Okay. I said, "Okay, what's that?" She said, "Why don't we do it on my bed? I love my bedroom." I said, "On your bed? Your bedroom?" And my producer hit me in the ribs, Larry Einhorn, and he said, "Yes, let's do it." And I remember I said, "Oh, okay, everybody walk up the stairs. I'll be right there," because I didn't want anybody to see me walking up the stairs. So I jumped on the bed. I was already in the bed, and we just started talking.
And how about the cameras? I mean, was there a big crew? I mean, how were you able to close it up so that they really just felt like they were talking to you?
Because they were on the sides, and you know, it was just intimate. It was like you coming closer to me and my coming closer to you, and just sitting there as two girls and chatting away.
Did you always find it really easy to do that?
Yeah, I did. It was almost like second nature. I was so curious. I mean, that's the thing, you know, as a reporter, you're curious. And you're curious to know, as I said, I always wanted to know what made people tick. Who were they really? You know, what do they think? Do they think like I think? Are they different than I am? They're rich, they're beautiful, they're this, they're that. I mean, but who are they? You know, do they ever have tough times? Do they ever really cry? Do they ever really break down? Do they, you know, are they really human? Can I touch them? Can I feel them? Can you feel their pain? It's all about touchy-feely.
Were there ground rules for interviews? Did you agree to those kinds of things, or did you basically let them go?
There a couple of times I was asked. It's funny you should ask that. I always wanted to do an interview with Betty Davis, and she wanted to do an interview with me. And we both turned out to be in Paris at the same time. And I asked if she would be interested. She was there, I think, to get the César Award, something like that. It was the biggest award that France gives to an artist. And I was there to do the 10th anniversary of Roman Polanski having left the United States under the cloud that he did. And Roman was willing to talk to me about it, because Roman desperately wanted to come back to the United States. And so while I was there, Betty Davis said to me, "I have only one favor to ask. Do not ask me about my daughter and her book. I do not wish to talk about it." I said, "Fine." I said, "Okay." One of the first questions I ask her is something about how did she feel about how the press has treated her entire career. And she says, "Well, not so much the press, but my daughter should write such a story about me." And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, she just told me not to talk about the book, the daughter, and here she is blurting it out. And, well, anyway, it went on, but to me, that whole interview was just an extraordinary interview when she talked about never basically having the love of her life with her at this particular time in her life. And she said of all the men that she married, the one that she would have liked to have been married to the longest was not the first husband, the actor.
We'll have to look it up. You want to stop camera for a minute?
I can't believe me.
Okay.
The only person she would have loved to have been married to was Gary Merrill. That was the man that she loved the most. And she said, but it was just such a difficult time to get married to anybody, because in the end, even though I tried my hardest, they always called my husband Mr. Davis. And she says, that's the greatest regret that I have in my life, that I was never able to keep the marriage going, any marriage going, and let alone now. She says, if what's going on in this world today, I probably would never have married anyone. She says, I would have slept with them, I would have lived with them, but I wouldn't have had to marry them. But in those days, you know, there were all these codes that we had to live by, and so I kept getting married. But it was to Merrill.
Gary Merrill.
Gary Merrill, to whom I would have loved to have stayed married. And I said, what was it about him? Oh, she said, we had so many things in common. We came from the same place. We understood the same things. But when she said it, there was such a real sadness that I saw in her eyes. And I don't know, every time I see that interview, I start tearing up myself, because for women, it has always been a big sacrifice, the career and the marriage.
What about you?
My first husband, who was deceased, loved what I did and was very, very supportive of what I did, until I think it reached a point where he never was called Mr. Barrett. People always knew his name was Trowbridge. But I think the fact that he never got to make a success of being a big producer in films, which is what he would like to have done. He also wished he really could have remained in broadcasting, which is where he was when I first met him. Was a big disappointment to him, and I think he was reaching 50, and he, I think, was beginning to have his midlife crisis, or he was just over 50, and I was losing him, and I just didn't want to lose him after 11, 12 years. So we decided to pick up stakes and move to Central California.
As a woman, how do you think that affected your career?
I think it was the right thing for me to do.
What about in terms of being a woman in the entertainment industry?
That part never really bothered me about whatever my success was. It was my success. I worked hard for it. I got what I got. I didn't get what I didn't get, and but I felt always sorry for him. I felt more sorry for him because he had other talents, and everybody loved him, but they always sidestepped him, and he was a very intelligent guy, but he was not the best businessman in the world. And so therefore, he never put the right deals together. And he was always with men when we went out who were the movers and the shakers of the entertainment industry. And I think at that particular moment in his life, it played a big part. And I'm quite sure I must have added something to it. It's never one-sided, but when I realized, I just decided I made a commitment, and I didn't want to break that commitment. And if he didn't want to break that commitment, then I was going to do whatever I could to keep that commitment and keep it rolling as the best way I knew how. So I never thought I was giving up anything except to work at something that I needed to work at.
You say you needed to work at it?
I needed to give him more time. And I had my time. I had my time and I've had a great life. I've had a great life, and it's not over yet. I'm just, I'm working harder than I've ever worked in my life right now.
Can you briefly talk about what you're doing?
Yes, I decided as my baby boomers were growing older, or phasing, as I say, I realized that a lot of them were in trouble financially, and that they needed, that there was a great need in this country to come up with a solution as to how we were going to house these people as they reached 65 and older and living longer, and how we were going to care for them. And I was taking care of my own dad. My mother had passed away, and one day, he was with me for 10 years before he passed away. My whole family said that if he hadn't lived with me, he would have been dead in a year's time. And so having that experience of taking care of a father for 5.5 years all by myself, I realized the needs were greater than I ever thought on how to care for the elderly. And so I sat down one night and I wrote on a piece of paper, if something like this happened to me, how would I want to live my life? How would I want to spend the rest of my life? And so I wrote out a plan and what I would want it to look like and what it would like it to be. And I called it the Golden Inn. And I wanted people who really were low-income seniors, working seniors, who needed an affordable place to live, never to feel that they had to leave that place, because if they could age in place, it was the right thing for them to do. It's a real hardship for the elderly to move around, and therefore if they got sick or sicker, they would be able to go next door and they would have somebody who could give them a little assisted living, or worse than that, if they were to get dementia or have Alzheimer's or something, they wouldn't have to leave that place either, because there would also be a place to take care of them, all under sort of one large roof or one big complex that would be in little different buildings, etc., and be in the country but near hospitals and near all the things that they would really need to access. And so I started telling a lot of people about what I wanted to do, and one day I met the architect who had built a wonderful facility in Santa Barbara that I thought I'd like to model one of my segments of this little village after. And he says, I love your idea. He says, if we could only do it and make it really affordable, he said, this would be the greatest solution to this growing crisis in our country about how we house the elderly and how we care for them. And so he started to put some designs together for me, and I went looking for a place, and then I was telling other people, and I needed money to know it, and I found this right spot, and I needed money to buy the land, and then somebody introduced me to the head of the housing department for the county of Santa Barbara, and they loved the idea, and they were involved in building affordable homes. Wow. And they said, we'll build the affordable homes. And you find the other elements, and we'll put them all together.
Well, it's gone full circle. I mean, you whenever you get an idea and you you make it happen.
I'm quite sure one day somebody will come along and make more realities out of this. This is definitely a situation that can be replicated. And it is an answer. It is not the only answer, but it is an answer to how we're going to care for our elderly and how to house them.
A couple of closing questions.
Sure.
What advice would you give to someone who wanted to follow in your footsteps?
Learn everything that you can learn about a business that you're going to write about. No matter whether you're going to write about Wall Street, or you're going to write about engineering, or you're going to write about Hollywood, or you're going to work in that field. You must learn everything that there is to learn about that business. And if there were more newspapers around or magazines around, I would say the best place to go to work is for a newspaper. You learn the best skills writing for a newspaper and learning how to be a very good reporter. The requirements are far greater than those that are necessarily needed even for television. But in television, if you're an investigative reporter, those skills become very, very useful. And that would be my advice. You must learn about your subject matter.
How do you feel about the word gossip columnist?
Well, I have always not liked the word gossip because I think it applied to women. If you were a man, they just called you a columnist. If you were a woman, you were a gossip columnist. And I don't think there really was a difference except in style. And so I kind of, I really had a sort of a resentment against the word gossip. But they can call me anything they want as long as they're not stones throwing them at me.
Did you ever have any kind of retaliation where you were worried that something was going to happen to you?
Once, during the Roman Polanski situation, not then, but when he was married to Sharon Tate, and she was murdered along with Jay Sebring and others.
Oh, the Manson.
The Manson murder situation, because there was that big list of people on there. My name was not on the list, but I had some incidents that caused the police to come and stay with me for 4 days. It was not a good incident. And I was working for Metro Media at the time, and they provided a private guard for me, and something happened to the guard in the middle of the night, and it was a messy situation, and I couldn't leave the house, and I was under guard, and if I walked out the door, the police were going to leave, and so forth and so on. So, I mean, I've had a lot of little things like that over the years.
What do you think is the power of television?
Immediacy. Well, the internet is now, of course, but television, up until very recently, it was the ability to get your information out like that.
And what do you think is your legacy in the industry?
Don't know. I really don't know what my legacy really is. You would have a better idea, and all the people sitting in this room would have a much better idea than myself. I tried hard. You know, I did the best I knew how to do. I worked very hard. I cared about what I was doing. It wasn't a job, and it wasn't for me to write a script for some movie studio. That was not the reason why I was in the business. I liked being a reporter. I liked interviewing people. I liked being with people. I like knowing what makes people tick. I still do to this very day. And I guess that's something that's just an inherent factor within you. But I've always been that way.
Rona,
and I guess I'll die that way too.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.